RetroDaze.
The 90s were a time of dynamic innovation and creativity. Many of the things kids loved from the 80s launched into the new decade with increased speed, energy, and a touch of the absurd. Commercials took on an air of surrealism, new intellectual properties were created from the minds of visionaries, and, best of all, kids programming began to question predetermined boundaries set by the previous decade. Instead of corporate-led cartoons produced with the sole aim to push toy sales, creators took back the animation scene with personal projects, original characters, and renewed passion. One of the absolute best destinations for these unique animated series was the first kids network, Nickelodeon. Join us as we revisit and celebrate the iconic cartoons that defined an era. This is Exploring the Golden Age of Nicktoons. Nickelodeon began its life in 1977 as a single live-action show created by Dr. Vivian Horner called Pinwheel. The series aired on channel C3 on Warner Cable's Cube in Columbus, Ohio. Due to the overwhelming success of the show, Dr. Horner planned to move it, plus a few other series, to a nationwide cable channel dedicated to kids. This new station had a number of possible names, but Pinwheel's producer Sandy Cavanaugh eventually landed on Nickelodeon, which historically referred to movie theaters with a 5-cent admission. Nickelodeon officially launched on April 1st, 1979, but arguably would not grow into the channel most of us know and love until 1984, when the newly appointed vice president, Geraldine Laybourne, controversially decided to accept advertising. Following this change, Laybourne also brought in the creative directors who helped create MTV's on-air identity, as well as new designers Tom Corey and Scott Nash, who created the now iconic Nickelodeon Splat, Rocket Ship, and Blimp logos. So many of the things we identify with Nickelodeon were born out of these changes. The channel's identity as the first kids network, the distinctive a cappella jingle, Nick at Night, the Kids' Choice Awards, Nick Jr., and Nickelodeon Studios all came into being during the next 5 years, leading inexorably to the 1990s and Nickelodeon's golden age. Nicktoons debuted on Sunday, August 11th, 1991 with 3 shows: Doug, Rugrats, and Ren and Stimpy. Looking at those first 3 Nicktoons, one can clearly see adherence to variety, from a quiet and clean preteen sitcom, to a surreal adventure series about toddlers, to the insane chaos of demented animals. And yet, these series thrived, not in spite of, but due to their harmonious disharmony. And that had always been the plan. That plan was Vanessa Coffey's, who was hired as an independent producer after cold calling Nickelodeon in 1988. The first of her 3 choices to get sent to pilot was Doug, a small-town dramedy about an imaginative middle schooler. According to Jim Jenkins, the creator of Doug, getting his show picked up by Nickelodeon was merely a matter of being in the right place at the right time. There was a girl named Linda Shupak who called me one day to say Nickelodeon had just started a new venture and they were looking for creator-driven original properties to animate and make into a series. So I met Vanessa in her office and held up my little book proposal. She explains that Doug was the missing piece in animation of the time, a show for kids that focused on their fears, emotions, and lives. The type of cartoon that really hadn't been around since the likes of Peanuts, where in the intervening years animation focused on action-adventure genres, often heavily promoting toy lines and rarely about much more than the fight against good and evil. Instead, Doug was a grounded comedy focused on characters. The titular Doug was in fact Jim Jenkins' alter ego, with many of the other characters and stories directly inspired by people he knew and events in his life. This made for perhaps the quietest of the Nicktoons, but one that hit home for many viewers and remains a fan favorite till this day. The next Nicktoon to air during the inaugural block of animation was Rugrats, a comedic series about a group of toddlers discovering things about life which usually become sprawling, imaginative adventures. The cartoon was the least developed of the series Coffey purchased, with only a logline to sell the idea. Even so, the then-married duo of Gabor Chupo and Arlene Klasky were just leaving The Simpsons after Chupo refused to fire an innocent producer and Coffey had complete faith in their abilities. The inspiration for Rugrats came from a short animated film Chupo had made years earlier based on one of their sons. According to Klasky, that film always stuck in my mind, so Rugrats was basically the same theory. If babies could talk, what would they say? As it turns out, plenty of other people wanted to know the answer to that very question because it was a hit. By 1996, the series had a record 20.8 million viewers per week. Nickelodeon producers claim Rugrats helped make them a #1 cable channel in the 90s. And even Steven Spielberg weighed in, calling it sort of a TV Peanuts of our time. While some young teens in the 90s may have felt juvenile for watching a group of babies wax philosophical about potty training, the truth is we were all watching whether we admitted it or not. If Rugrats was the show no one admitted they watched, Ren and Stimpy was the edgy, cool series everyone bragged about watching. The one with catchphrases, gross-out moments, and slapstick comedy galore. What made it even better was, generally speaking, parents hated it. And that just made kids want to do the happy, happy, joy, joy dance that much more. This final show in the original Nicktoons lineup was arguably the most popular with kids during the first half of the 90s. While all three of the Nicktoons often dealt with adult themes, Ren and Stimpy was adult in another way altogether. The deranged dog and cat ended up appealing to teens and especially college kids, often even airing on MTV alongside the likes of Beavis and Butthead. The characters Ren and Stimpy were originally a small part of a larger cast of characters for a show called Your Gang that John Kricfalusi had been pitching. To Kricfalusi's surprise, Coffee stopped the pitch and asked to hear more about the dog and cat. They stripped the characters out of Your Gang and Ren and Stimpy, the series, was born. Ren and Stimpy's decline was almost as swift as its meteoric rise. Despite its innovative artwork, golden age voice acting from the likes of Billy West, and subversion of animation standards, the creator's lack of professionalism led inexorably to the loss of his job in 1992. Since Nickelodeon owned the rights, the series continued without Kricfalusi, under the creative lead of Bob Camp for an additional 3 seasons before cancellation. There was one attempt to reboot the series in 2003, but the less said about Ren and Stimpy adult party cartoon, the better. Although not part of the initial launch, the success of Nicktoons led to other classics such as Rocko's Modern Life in 1993, Real Monsters in 1994, and Hey Arnold in 1996 to continued mass appeal. Of course, this wasn't the end of Nicktoons, as over the years, many more classics like SpongeBob SquarePants, which overtook Rugrats as the flagship animated series, became part of the brand. With so many critically acclaimed series, there's no shortage of personal favorites. So, of course, I have to ask, which was your favorite Nicktoon? I'd love to hear about it down in the comments. And if you enjoy our content, please consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and maybe even activating that ubiquitous notification bell. It really does make a huge difference. Let's meet again next week to celebrate Yesteryear right here on RetroDaze.
Clicky clicky.